The morning Gordon Aldridge walked into the Fairmont's dining room. He had exactly 47 minutes before his flight back to Calgary. He had timed it the way he timed everything, down to the coffee order, a black Americano, no sugar, placed the moment he sat down. He had a table by the window, the same one he always requested when business brought him to Vancouver, because from there he could see the harbor and the seaplanes lifting off the water in slow, unhurried arcs. It was the one thing in his life, he sometimes thought, that he had never been able to schedule. He was 53 years old. He had built a construction company from a two-man operation in a Cochrane garage to one of the largest commercial developers in Western Canada. He had a house in Mount Royal that had been photographed for a magazine he had never read. He had a driver named Phil, who waited outside with the engine running. He did not have a family, or rather, he had once, and that was a different story entirely. He was halfway through his eggs when he saw the girl. She was standing just inside the entrance to the dining room, wearing a winter coat that was 2 sizes too large and so worn at the elbows that the lining showed through in pale, fraying patches. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. Her hair was dark and pulled back with an elastic band, the kind used to bundle broccoli at the grocery store, and she was holding a backpack against her chest like a shield. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing he noticed, the careful, deliberate way she was not crying. The maitre d' was moving toward her with the particular expression of a man about to perform an unpleasant task politely. And then the girl looked across the room and her eyes landed on Gordon. She walked straight to his table. He set down his fork. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady, which surprised him. "Could I sit with you? Just for a little while. I'm not asking for food or anything. I just need to sit somewhere warm." Gordon looked at her for a long moment. The maitre d' had stopped at the edge of the carpet, uncertain. "Sit down," Gordon said. He waved the maitre d' off, and the man retreated with evident relief. The girl sat across from him and placed her backpack carefully on her lap. She looked at the table, the white linen, the silver cutlery, the small vase with a single sprig of eucalyptus, and then she looked out at the harbor, the way he had been doing, and for a strange moment, they were simply 2 people watching the same seaplane lift off the water. "What's your name?" Gordon asked. "Nell," she said. "Are you hungry, Nell?" She hesitated. "I said I wasn't asking. I know what you said." He caught the eye of the server. "She'll have the same as me, and orange juice." Nell looked at him then, really looked, the way children do when they are deciding whether to trust you, whether the adult in front of them is the kind who keeps their word, or the kind who says one thing and does another. Whatever she found in his face seemed to satisfy her, at least provisionally, because she set her backpack down on the floor beside her chair and sat up straight. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." They were quiet for a while. The eggs came. Nell ate with the focused attention of someone who had not had a hot meal recently, though she used her knife and fork correctly, which told Gordon something, though he wasn't sure what. "How old are you? Where are your parents?" She picked up her orange juice. "My mom died in October." He said nothing. The harbor glittered. "My dad." She stopped. "Put the glass down. I don't really know about my dad." Gordon had built his entire professional life on knowing when to press and when to wait. He waited. "I've been staying with my mom's friend, Mrs. Biozalale, but she has a new boyfriend and he doesn't. It's not a good situation." Nell said this with a matter-of-factness that was more painful than tears would have been. "So I left. I've been at the shelter on Hastings, but they said I have to have a guardian to stay there more than 3 nights, and I'm out of nights." "How long have you been out of nights?" "Since yesterday." Gordon looked at the girl across the linen tablecloth. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow, a half-moon of pale skin. Her nails were clean. She'd made an effort. "Where were you last night?" he asked. "The library stays open until 9, Nell said. "And then I found a Timmy's that was open all night. The lady at the counter let me stay." "A Tim Hortons." In November, in Vancouver, a child had spent the night in a Tim Hortons because a woman behind a counter had let her. "Nell," Gordon said carefully, "is there anyone I should call? A teacher, a social worker, anyone who knows where you are." "If you call anyone official, they'll put me in foster care," she said. "I've been in foster care before, after my grandma died, when I was 8. I don't want to go back. What happened when you were 8? She looked out the window again. A Canada Goose had landed on the dock below, and was picking its way along the railing with the dignified indifference of a bird that owned the place. "It wasn't bad exactly," Nell said slowly. "It was just, no one knew me, you know? No one knew what I was like before. They just saw the file." Gordon knew about files. He knew about being reduced to a number on a page, to a liability, to a line item. He had spent a decade in his 20s trying to claw his way out from under the file the bank had on his father, who had died, leaving nothing but debts and a half-built house outside of Red Deer. He looked at his watch. He had 31 minutes before his flight. He picked up his phone and called Phil. "I'm not going to make it," he said. "Book me on the afternoon one." Nell had heard this. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, not yet. Something more careful than gratitude, something that needed more evidence before it would become gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Eat your eggs," he said. The next 2 hours were among the stranger ones of Gordon Aldridge's adult life. He took Nell to get dry socks. Her feet, she mentioned almost in passing, had been wet since the previous afternoon. And then to a pharmacy for a few basic things she accepted in silence, and with a dignity that made the act of handing over a basket of toothpaste and shampoo feel oddly like something that required care. He did not make a production of it. He did not say the sorts of things adults say when they are performing kindness for an audience. He simply paid and handed her the bag. They walked for a while along the seawall, because she said she liked the water, and because Gordon found, to his own surprise, that he was in no particular hurry. He had called his office manager, a capable woman named Phyllis, who had been running his calendar for 11 years, and told her to move the afternoon. She had asked no questions. She never did. Nell walked with her hands in the pockets of the large coat. She told him about her mother. Her name had been Trudy, and she had worked as a home care aide, and she had died of a pulmonary embolism at 42, which Nell explained with clinical precision, the way children explain things they have had to explain many times to many adults who seemed to need it simplified. She was healthy, Nell said. That's the weird part. She ran every Sunday morning. We had a route. We'd go to the corner store and she'd get a coffee, and I'd get a hot chocolate, and we'd walk back along the alley where someone had painted murals on all the garage doors. Animals mostly. There was a fox. I liked the fox. Gordon thought about his own mother, who had been a practical woman with a talent for making do, and who had died when he was 38, and who he still missed in the blunt, unspecific way you miss someone who shaped you before you had language for it. "Your mother sounds like a good person," he said. "She was," Nell said simply. "She was my best friend." They had stopped walking. Below the seawall, the water was the particular gray-green of the Pacific in November, and the North Shore mountains had clouds sitting on them like wool. "Nell," Gordon said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked up at him, waiting. "Do you know anything about your father? Anything at all? All?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and took out an envelope. It was creased and slightly damp at the corners, and she held it with both hands. "My mom left me a letter," she said, "to open if she wrote it last year when she had a health scare, before the embolism. Like she knew something might happen." Nell paused. "I've read it a lot of times. She says my dad's name is Callum Aldridge. She said she met him in Calgary in 2013, and that he was kind to her, and that she didn't tell him about me because she didn't want to complicate his life. She said if I ever needed to find him, if things got bad, his company is called Aldridge Development." The seawall seemed to tilt slightly under Gordon's feet. His brother, Callum, who had died 4 years ago of a heart attack at 50, having never married, having never mentioned a child, having left his shares in the company to Gordon in a will that was signed with the same loose, leftward scrawl he'd had since they were boys. Gordon stood very still. Nell was watching him. "Do you know that company?" she asked. He turned to face her. Her eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and now that he was looking, really looking, with the specific attention that this moment required, he could see the particular set of her jaw, the slight asymmetry of her eyebrows, the way she held herself when she was uncertain. Things he recognized not from a photograph, but from 40 years of knowing a face. Callum's jaw, Callum's brow. "Yes," Gordon said. "I know that company." He sat down on the nearest bench, not because his legs failed him, but because he felt the need to be at her level. to be the same height as this child who had spent the night in a Tim Hortons with wet socks and her mother's letter in her pocket. "Nell," he said, "my name is Gordon Aldridge. Callum was my brother." She stared at him. "He passed away 4 years ago," Gordon said. "I'm so sorry. But if what your mother wrote is true, and I believe it is, then you and I are family." The careful, deliberate not crying that Nell had been maintaining since she walked into the Fairmont's dining room came apart then, not all at once, but the way ice does in March, a slow cracking that starts at the edges and works its way in. She didn't sob. She put her face in her hands and sat very still, and her shoulders moved, and Gordon, who had not held a child since he could remember, who had not had occasion to, put his arm around her, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was as true as simply being there. After a while, she wiped her face with the sleeve of the oversized coat. "I didn't expect," she said, "to find anything." "Neither did I," said Gordon, and he meant it in more ways than she knew. What followed was not simple, and Gordon would not have wanted it to be. He called his solicitor that same afternoon from the hotel lobby, while Nell sat across the room in an armchair with a hot chocolate and a battered copy of a Neil Gaiman book she'd produced from her backpack. His solicitor, a precise and unflappable man named Alistair, listened to everything and then asked a series of questions in the calm, methodical way of someone who has learned that the most extraordinary situations reveal themselves to be at their structural core a series of solvable problems. "The DNA question is the first thing," Alistair said, "not because we doubt the letter, but because clarity is kindness. For her as much as anything." Gordon agreed. He arranged it, gently explaining to Nell that it was simply a formality, the kind of thing that needed to be done, so that no one could ever question it later. She understood immediately, faster than he expected, and she stuck out her arm for the swab with a businesslike composure that made the nurse in the clinic smile. In the interim, Gordon rebooked his flight indefinitely and moved to a suite at the hotel. Not out of extravagance, but because Nell needed a separate room with a door that locked from the inside, because no one had ever explained to her that she should expect that, and Gordon felt strongly that someone should. He called the school board and arranged for her records to be assessed. He called a child welfare advocate, not the system itself, not yet, but a woman Alistair recommended who specialized in navigating what she called the gap between what children need and what institutions are equipped to provide. And he called no one else, because Nell had asked him not to, at least not until they knew. They ate dinner together every evening at a restaurant near the hotel. Nothing fancy, because Nell said fancy made her nervous. They went to a Canadian Tire, because she needed proper winter boots, and she took 17 minutes to choose between 2 pairs, examining the soles with the seriousness of a person who understood that the wrong choice had real consequences. Gordon stood beside her and did not rush her. She was funny, which surprised him, or rather he was surprised to find himself surprised by it. As if a child who had been through what she had been through was not supposed to have a dry, sideways sense of humor about geese and hotel soap, and the particular way elevator music always seemed to be one step removed from a real song. "It's like someone described music to a person who'd never heard it," she said one evening, tilting her head at the lobby speakers, and then that person described it to someone else, and that person made this. Gordon laughed. He could not remember the last time he had laughed at something someone said and meant it. He learned that she liked geography, not maps exactly, but the logic of how places worked, why cities were where they were, why rivers bent the way they bent. He learned that she was afraid of escalators but not elevators, and that she would eat almost anything except cooked peas, which she described as a betrayal by texture. He learned that she had read the entirety of the Public Library's Agatha Christie collection while waiting, because waiting, she said, was easier when someone else was solving something. She asked him about Callum. He told her what he could, that his brother had been quieter than Gordon, more careful, better at listening, that he had loved hockey in the abstract way of someone who follows it for the arguments rather than the game, that he had been funny too, with the same sideways quality, and that now Gordon understood where it came from, or rather, that it had gone somewhere. One evening, about 10 days in, she asked him what would happen next. He had been expecting the question, and he had thought about how to answer it honestly, without making promises he wasn't certain he could keep. He had learned, over a half-century, that certainty was the most expensive gift to give a child, because the cost of breaking it was paid in compound interest. "The DNA results will come back next week," he said, "and then we'll know officially what I already know." "What do you already know?" "That you're Callum's daughter, and that means you're my family." Nell looked at the table. They were at the same restaurant they had been going to, a quiet Italian place where the owner had started putting Nell's usual order in as soon as they walked through the door without being asked. "I don't know how to be someone's family," she said. I knew how to be my mom's, but that was just the two of us." "I don't know how to be family to a child," Gordon said. "I've never done it. I'll probably make mistakes." She considered this. "What kind of mistakes?" "I expect I'll schedule things when you need me not to. I'll probably give you too much space when you need less. I'll assume you're fine when I should ask. I'll ask when you want to be left alone." Nell was quiet for a moment. "My mom used to check on me too much," she said, "when she was worried about me. She'd ask how I was doing like 6 times in a row." A pause. "I used to get kind of annoyed." Gordon watched her. "I'd give a lot," she said carefully, "for someone to ask me 6 times in a row right now." The results came on a Thursday morning in an email Alistair forwarded with a single line, as expected. Gordon was sitting at the desk in the hotel suite when it arrived. Nell was in the next room, and he could hear the quiet sound of her moving around, the particular creak of the floor near the window where she always stood to watch the harbor in the mornings. He knocked on her door. "Come in," she said. She was standing exactly where he'd expected, in her new boots and the coat that still seemed too large, though he had noticed she had stopped holding it closed at the chest the way she had at the beginning. The North Shore mountains were clear today, their peaks catching the first of the winter snow. He held out his phone. She read the email twice, then she gave his phone back. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood at the window together for a moment, looking out at the harbor. Below them, a seaplane was coming in across the water, its floats skimming the surface before it settled, and then it slowed and turned and moved toward the dock, and the whole thing happened in under a minute, this ordinary, extraordinary landing, the way it always did. "Gordon," she said. "Yes." She looked at him with Callum's eyes, Callum's brow, and something else that was entirely her own. "Can I call you Uncle Gordon? Or is that weird?" He cleared his throat. "It's not weird." "Okay." She turned back to the window. Uncle Gordon. He had built a company from nothing. He had negotiated contracts in rooms full of men who wanted him to fail. He had stood in the rain in Red Deer at his father's grave and promised himself that he would make something, and he had. He was not a man accustomed to being undone by 2 words. He was undone by 2 words. "We should talk about what comes next," he said when he could. "Calgary," she asked. "If you want. It's where I live. It's cold. I know what Calgary is," she said, with the slight exasperation of a child who knows her geography. "It's on the Bow River. It has the Stampede. The mountains are close." "The mountains are very close," he said. "On clear days you can see them from downtown." She thought about this. "Would I have my own room?" "Yes, and I could come back here." "To visit. I want to see the murals." "The garage door murals," he said. "My mom and I had a route." She said it simply, without flinching, but he had learned by now that simplicity was not the same as ease. "I want to find the fox again. We'll come back," Gordon said. "I'll make sure of it." He meant it the way he had meant few things in his professional life, with the clear-eyed commitment of someone who understood that some contracts are not written on paper and are binding for exactly that reason. A year later, on a Sunday morning in November, Gordon Aldridge and his niece Nell stood at the corner of an alley in East Vancouver. The murals were still there. Someone had repainted the fox since Nell's last visit. The colors were brighter, the lines crisper, and a small nest had been added at the corner of the frame, 3 eggs the color of the sky. Nell stood in front of it for a long time. She had grown 3 centimeters since Calgary, and her hair was loose now rather than in the broccoli band elastic, and she had an opinion about every restaurant they'd passed on the way from the hotel. This one too loud. That one the right kind of quiet. The coffee shop on the corner with the steamed-up windows looking, she said, like somewhere a good conversation would happen. She had been going to school in Calgary, to a teacher Gordon had been relieved to find who clearly understood that what Nell needed was not remediation but room. She had joined a geography club. She had made a friend named Preethi, who shared her assessment of cooked peas. She had started running on Sunday mornings, and sometimes Gordon ran with her badly, and she tolerated this with a patience that he recognized as generous. She still kept the letter. It lived in the front pocket of whichever bag she was carrying. Gordon had never asked to read it again after that first day, and Nell had never offered. It was hers, the way some things are simply and entirely yours. She reached out and touched the fox with 2 fingers, lightly, as though checking that it was real. She would have liked knowing, Nell said, not sadly, just truthfully, that I found someone. Gordon stood beside her in the alley, hands in his pockets, looking at the 3 eggs in the nest. I think, he said carefully, she probably already knew you would. Nell considered this the way she considered most things, seriously, from multiple angles, without rushing to a conclusion. Maybe, she said. She stepped back from the mural. She looked up at him with her father's eyes and her mother's steadiness and the particular expression she had when she had decided something. Come on then, she said. I want hot chocolate. There was a place on Robson that looked like the right kind of quiet. Gordon followed her out of the alley and into the November morning, into the city that had been her mother's and was now also hers, into the ordinary, extraordinary life they were building the only way anyone ever does. One day at a time, 1 cup of hot chocolate at a time, until the days add up to something neither of them had planned and both of them had needed.